Hear what local professors think is the impact of the Trump verdict. Also, the clash between a school board and the media. And where is racial justice 4 years after George Floyd died? Ivory Tower's next.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Geddes Federal Savings and Loan offers home loans, IRAs, money market, checking, and savings accounts.
Geddes Federal, how can I help you this morning?
Personal service. Get it at Geddes. Offices in Westvale Plaza and in Manlius.
Bond, serving public and private companies, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs. Providing a crucial link with guidance on business matters, regulatory compliance, intellectual property, and employment law. Bond, essential to your business.
Ivory Tower is sponsored by James Jordan Associates Architects, providing professional architectural services to educational, commercial, and institutional clients throughout New York State. James Jordan Associates Architects, with offices in Richfield Springs, New York.
Welcome to Ivory Tower. I'm Barbara Fote from Syracuse University. Joining me on the panel this week are Anirban Acharya from Moyne College, Aaron Strong from Hamilton College, Michael Tillotson from SUNY Cortland, and Luke Perry from Utica University. Most of us were surprised Thursday afternoon by the quickness of that guilty verdict in the Trump election corruption trial here in New York. And panel, I am eager to hear your perspectives about what's going to be the reaction in central New York, where in our 5-county area around Syracuse, it's roughly a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third voters who've not designated a party. So Aaron, what's going to be the impact here?
Well, first of all, I think this is a really big moment for our democracy. I think this is the kind of moment that you will remember where you were. I will always remember that I was coaching my daughter's soccer game when I found out that Trump was guilty on all 34 counts. But I think, political pundits like to talk a lot about verdicts like this, and they're talking about, will Trump be able to vote for himself in Florida if he's a convicted felon or not? I think what matters in central New York is to think about how this is going to play out in our probably pretty tight congressional race. Brandon Williams had a town hall in Clay on Wednesday night before the verdict, right, our congressman. And what did he talk about? He talked about I-81, he talked about Onondaga Lake, he talked about Micron. Who did he not talk about? He did not talk about Trump. And I think what you're going to see in a very close race, where we're now in a district in New York 22 that leans a little bit to the Democratic side, I think you're going to see Republicans shy a little bit away from focusing on Trump and not fully hitch their wagon to Trump when they're out talking in the public. But Congressman Williams has made a lot of statements. He denies elements of the election. I think he is going to hitch himself to Trump when he's talking to his base, but when he's talking to the general public, he's going to shy a little bit more away from Trump on this.
Yeah, I mean, what a stormy week for Trump, right? But, at this, right, I was listening to a lot of news report, and it seems to me that, there is a large number of Republicans for whom the resolve would be more hardened because of this. They would actually find themselves to be more in support of Trump. And primarily because, look, I mean, this was kind of a very obscure legal theory that was used. The person who's prosecuting his predecessor didn't want to do it. And there's already some misinformation going on, right, regarding that, the judge apparently was biased and didn't ask the jury to actually vote unanimously and so on, which is wrong. So, on the whole, I don't know what is going to happen, but I don't think it will take away much of power from Trump, from actually the Trump voters or Trump supporters. But, it was an interesting day to see, that in the United States, at least in some way, the rule of law works, even if it's the President of the United States. But, that opens up a space where a primarily very red county in United States can prosecute, Democratic presidents. So that's also kind of a path that one can.
And rule of law, of course, is very important when we think about the state of democracy. But one thing that concerns me is thinking about our presidential election system as a whole. One of the reasons we didn't begin as a democracy and we had this quirky electoral college created was because the framers were concerned about particularly an individual who might be captivating and generate popular support but not actually be a sound and competent political leader. And here we are, we saw both Donald Trump and Joe Biden talking about how this fall's election is actually going to determine, you know, who should be president, obviously. And I think that I'm worried about the state of democracy because Trump's following is borderline cultish, where everybody else is the problem and not him. And it's very concerning to me what that might mean when it comes to the election.
Michael, you come from a more Republican county, Cortland County. What's your sense of how this is going to play out?
Well, the fact that so many Americans are still willing to vote for a convicted felon, right? To Aaron's point, this is an American moment, right? And the verdict represents the start, perhaps, of a new American moment, in the sense that the president has succeeded in a rather magisterial way in reconstructing the psychological infrastructure of some Americans into a framework of accepting his idea that the rules are there are no rules and those are the rules. That's his idea, that the rules are fallible. They can be broken, and it's regular and it's normal, right? And this goes across demographics, goes across incomes, goes across states, right? His particular species of charismatic populism is one of the most dangerous conceptualizations of influence in the history of the human story. It changes nation states. It creates the end of empires. It dissolves republics, right? It undermines institutions. And equally important, it separates people from our sense of human decency in civic affairs. And I'm not exactly sure if the conservatives want to admit that their Frankenstein is operating without them or their established principles in place. But a long-range analysis suggests that history will ask one fundamental question, and that question is this: why the Republican Party allowed this to happen to America?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very grave moment also. You know, the most important thing is the absolute election denial. Like, they do not want to, the Republicans, many Republicans do not want to actually concede an election. Trump, I don't think, would concede an election even if he loses in 2025. So this might actually help him in a big way. And also when it comes to sentencing and stuff, right, what is going to happen? He has no criminal record, right? He's an upstanding, so he's the president of the United States. So what would happen? Probation, what does probation look like for, you know, what does community service look like for Donald Trump? And with all that, I mean, if the judge says, hey, do some probation, do something good for New Yorkers, that is actually a good publicity stunt for him. So I think it might be hugely backfiring for the Democrats in many ways. But we will see. And you know, the point well taken. The Trump has reshaped the Democratic Party, Republican Party, in a way that many people don't even want to concede that an election has been, you know, rightly adjudicated. So it's a whole new world for us.
Last word, Aaron.
I think the threat of authoritarian populism is very real. But we have a long history of this country of duels, gunslinging, political violence, terrific corruption. So I think we do want to keep some perspective. This is an American democratic experiment. I'm a scientist, and when you do experiments, they keep going, and this project is going to keep going. We'll see where it takes us. So I think we're right to have a lot of caution, but 12 stone-faced jurors issued a verdict of guilty on 34 counts. That's also a moment of pride I have in American democratic principles and rule of law. To see that happen was pretty impressive.
Well, we will see where this experiment continues. I'm sure we will be talking about it around this table even more. Our next topic relates to the accountability of public officials, specifically conflict between the Syracuse City School Board members and the media. The school board had its attorneys send a somewhat threatening letter to local Channel 3, WSTM, saying reporters were harassing board members by calling them. It was about a violent incident at a school where a teacher was beaten up. The board's policy is that only the president speaks for the board. And I understand that policy. Luke, you've been a school board member. How do you see this?
I think it's a complicated situation for sure. I think reporters are doing their job by trying to get more information and informing the public. I also think being a school board member is a very time-consuming, largely thankless job where you are unpaid or minimally paid. So I think in this particular case, I think the school board needs to have good communication with the media. You want to have a productive relationship there. Sending a letter suggesting that there's been harassment is probably not going to be helpful to that relationship. And so that's not to say that harassment isn't real. I experienced it as a board member. It wasn't from the press. It was more from individual members coming up and community members yelling at you and saying all kinds of things, true and untrue, in a hostile way. So those kind of things happen. But I think in this case, the letter was not a good idea, and I think that it was a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I will start by saying, going to the basics, right? The professional hazard of any public service is, surprise, surprise, facing the public. And especially if you are taking, even if the public has the most deplorable, to use Hillary Clinton's politically suicidal comments, that you should be still open to it, should be able to hear it, especially when you're elected and you are drawing money from the public exchequer, right? So you cannot run a school board a way you can run, say, maybe a barbecue business, right? So as a result, I do think that this is an authoritarian move rather than a democratic move. And school board members should be answering to the media directly, rather than kind of this weird corporate thing that, you can only talk to my president through written emails. I don't think that is democratic, coming from a school board that is primarily democratic. So it's kind of laughable to me, in fact.
One of the problems, Anirban, though, is we're in a moment of extreme threats of violence against public elected officials, including local officials. I'm not saying that's the case here in Syracuse, but the Brennan Center for Justice did a survey of public officials around the country, found that 1 in 5 local office holders, we're talking about largely volunteer public servants who are just trying to help their community, 1 in 5 local public office holders is facing threats of violence from their community, right? So there's a fine line between accountability and then harassment, and also fear for your own, like, am I going to be safe in my house? I volunteered for this position in my community, and now people are threatening me.
Yeah, and I had to accompany board members in and out of meetings, particularly women who felt that they were dealing with hostility from community members who were male and did not feel comfortable coming and going from meetings. So that is real. I think, Anirban, one thing that's different about school boards is that individual school board members don't have a voice. That's how we were trained by the state association. Our voice is collective, and that's why most policies have a point person, particularly the president, who's elected by the board as the spokesperson for the board as a whole. So I think those dynamics are somewhat different than your run-of-the-mill elected official.
Michael, your thoughts on, there's a lot of money being spent by the school board. They've just hired some new people to do better communications, although I think it's really less than 1% of the budget. But what about this communication public access?
Yeah, I think we sometimes leave the students out of the conversation right now. Let's take a quick peek at some of the numbers, right? The middle school absentee rate is right at 48%. The high school absentee rate is right at 58%. The math proficiency is 16%. The ELA test scores rate 644 out of 661 districts. The graduation rate last year was right at 70%, right? With those numbers, I think we need to take a hard look at 2 types of improvements. Soft improvements, those non-instructional investments that they're spending way too much money on, and hard improvements, classroom-focused investments. When you're looking at prioritizing things, you have to think about hard improvements. What are the hallmarks of hard improvements? 6 things: pedagogy, instruction, curriculum, special needs, student engagement, and parental involvement. So if spending almost $750,000 on soft improvements, non-instructional, out-of-classroom investments, things like, as I read, increasing Facebook profiles, growing social media representation, hyping sports and cheerleading. If that doesn't increase these dismal numbers, if they think they've had a rough time, now they're going to have a much rough time next year. So I wish them well, but I'm just not clear on the priorities of Syracuse at this time.
Okay. We're going to leave it there, and we'll turn to our next topic. 4 years ago, the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis set off a global movement. Protests all over, laws to ban chokeholds, questions about police funding, pairing mental health counselors with cops. Corporations promised $200 billion for racial justice, but we don't hear much about those initiatives now. Michael, where are we after 4 years?
Well, I've got one word for this, and it's called backlash, right? Every time in America, when America tries to show some sense of egalitarianism toward black Americans, there's a backlash. It's nothing new, right? Coming out of Reconstruction, 1877, the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, all those ideas, right? Ending enslavement, due process, the right to vote for black males. Whenever America makes an egalitarian move, there's a backlash, right? We had Jim Crow in response to Reconstruction. 19 years later, we had 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, the doctrine of separate but equal coming out of the Supreme Court. 1954, Brown versus Board, desegregating American schools. What happens 3 years later? We have the bloody riots in Arkansas when they tried to integrate Arkansas schools. We go to 64.
This is just normal.
Right, we go to 64 to 65, the passage of the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act, deadly riots in the South. The South swings from Democrat to Republican. For the sake of time, I'll go to the election of Barack Obama and the creation of the Tea Party movement. Post-George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the censorship of black books, the attack on critical race theory, the dismantling of DEI, the dismantling of affirmative action, the reconfiguration of AP history courses. All of these backlashes set the climate for something that we don't appreciate enough. All these ideas set the climate for the idea that race is no longer an appropriate discussion for policy analysis. So of course, the entities that did not want to do these things in the first place, they're reneging on their performative ideas at the time, and it's a perfect crime scene without the tape. The only good thing to come out of this moment is that many black Americans are now starting to understand this notion of invisible Jim Crow, these contemporary ideological threats to their internal security, right? Which may lead to a more pronounced collective efficacy in the black experience. That's the only good thing that comes out of this. And I say this really quickly. If you look at the record numbers of enrollments for HBCUs, that's a bellwether to let you know that black America is paying attention.
Because enrollment is going up.
Absolutely, it's off the charts.
I mean, you summed up exactly what I kind of wrote there, and I will sum it up with the Leon Bridges song from Gold Diggers, and it says, hoping for a life more sweeter, instead I'm just a story repeating. And that's the story that's repeating, that every time black Americans have gained an iota of, and their allies have fought for an iota of freedom, there is this white supremacist backlash against black Americans, women primarily also, and poor people, and it's a no-brainer. So now what is happening? Now what is happening is acute levels of epistemological violence, right? We are going to write in school textbooks that slavery was somehow beneficial to a person because they gained skills, right? Like as if physical abuse makes you stronger, that kind of a weird argument. And the Republican Party is headed towards that, right? Republican Party now, by all objective counts, they resemble the far-right Nazi outfits like AfD in Germany than the Conservative Party in Britain, right? So we have one part of the United States as a backlash of, protest against police brutality, tremendous levels of police brutality in the United States, which still continues. Police killed about 1,150 people last year, or I was just seeing in Guardian and stuff like that. So, but I do think that since the material conditions have changed, like social media and stuff like that, the ability to organize against these kinds of patriarchy, this kind of white supremacist, vitriol, for the lack of a better word, that is much more pronounced. I saw the most wonderful multiracial protest by young people after George Floyd, which was not seen before, right? So I think there is some important change happening. But the backlash, of course, would be there. That's a part of the American DNA.
Well, please ask you.
Well, one of the interesting things is that I think we have seen exactly this backlash, this white supremacist backlash against Black Lives Matter, against police reform, but we have seen some incremental police reforms that have largely not gone to ending racial profiling or racialized violence or targeting of Black Americans. They've gone to do things like support mental health response teams for people who are unhoused. And that's a good thing. We want that. So we have seen some incremental changes. Denver, for example, has this support team assisted response. If someone's having a mental health crisis, armed police are not the first responders anymore. People who can actually spend hours helping provide services for someone are coming in and helping. And that came out of, after the murder of George Floyd. I think what's going to be interesting is how some of these initial experiments play out over the next few years to think about how policing changes over time. But I completely agree with Michael and Anirban about what's happening.
And in terms of law enforcement, it's largely a local prerogative, right? So from the macro perspective, I think you did a great job laying out the historical contours. But when you look at what some localities are doing, I think there has been some modest policy progress. You mentioned mental health. I also think the use of police cameras, studies have showed that those have grown, and as those have grown, there's been greater documentation of instances of brutality. And obviously that was related to the George Floyd case. It's led to better handling of misconduct, right? It's led to more training for police officers. It's led to the lessening of racial disparity and the resolving of misconduct, the use of cameras. So certainly that's not going to fix all the problems, but I do think there has been some small policy gains over the last few years.
Some gains, corporations doing some things?
Policy gains, okay, fine, but we still have goon squads in Mississippi. And I have to live with that reality as soon as I walk out of this studio every day.
Yeah, but you know, Camden did some good job. There's a good film about Camden, the story of police reform progress. But yeah, the goon squad, like, you know, here is a squad operating with impunity by basically torturing black people with no consequences. And even the new chat records that came out, many of the deputies are still in their jobs, right? And it's unbelievable what these people did for years and years and years. And
violence against black Americans is an intractable part of the American spirit. Yeah. And as soon as we accept that reality, something real can happen.
And let's hope something real will happen to change those things. We haven't come as far as we wanted. I hear you saying some good things and some things, many things yet to work on. It is time to open up that grade book. And Anirban, let's hear your F.
Well, my F goes to Nikki Haley's reckless and inhumane actions of writing "finish them" on Israeli artilleries as the ruthless attack on Rafah continues in violation of international law. This only goes to show the underlying genocidal fantasies that one reflects and nurtures. One must be ashamed of the name Nimrata because the meaning of that is politeness and humility and benevolence. So shame on you, Nikki.
Okay, Aaron, who gets your F?
My F goes to carbon offsets. What are they? Basically, you can claim you're reducing your own carbon emissions by not actually reducing your own carbon emissions, but by paying someone else to reduce their emissions. What's the problem? Many of these things being paid for aren't actually real. In a report just released by Corporate Accountability, a nonprofit watchdog, many of the carbon offsets being used by major corporations like Delta Airlines, Disney, and Nestle to showcase their green credentials are, quote, likely junk and worthless in terms of cutting emissions. Do better.
So likely junk, what are they going to?
Basically, trees are being planted and those forests are never growing, and you're saying, oh, look at all this carbon we've stored in these trees. The trees never grew. They're not real.
Okay. Michael, who gets your F?
My F goes to the Colorado GOP for calling for children to be pulled from public schools in Colorado.
Say more about that. What do they want to do?
They want the American, how can I put this? They argue that the American school system is an indoctrinating institution and they want public schools to be closed.
Aha. All right, Luke, who else?
My F goes to recent reporting that thousands of Native American children were sexually abused after being forced into Catholic boarding schools during the 1950s and 1960s. The church needs to acknowledge and address this.
Okay, let's hope someone has done something well. Anirban, have you got an A for us?
The A goes to the Executive Director of the Samaritan Center, Mary Beth Fry, and the staff and the volunteer of the Samaritan Center, who strive every day to fulfill the center's mission to serve the hungry and those in need in order to promote their welfare, dignity, and self-sufficiency. The center serves well over 100,000 meals annually, and its operation relies on upwards of 1,500 volunteers. Recently, Moyne College awarded her with an honorary degree. Well deserved.
Very nice. Aaron.
My A goes to the legacy of Bill Walton, who passed away this week. He was an absolute one-of-a-kind legend and epitomized marching to your own drum on the basketball court and later as a commentator. As someone who in my own work focuses primarily on climate change and climate policies, and also as a lifelong Celtics fan, I want to specifically take this opportunity to thank Bill Walton for his tireless efforts as a champion of renewable energy, working to make the energy transition more affordable and accessible for everyone. You probably didn't know that about Bill Walton.
Did he talk about it?
Oh yeah, he wrote all these letters in California about the solar energy transition and making it more accessible for everyone. He was a real champion of it.
Very good. Michael, who gets your A?
My A goes to Berry Elementary School in Cortland, who held a fantastic kindergarten through second grade art show Wednesday night. Kudos to the students, parents, and the teachers, especially my wife's second grade class.
What kind of art did your wife's class do?
All kinds of art about dogs and parrots and ball-headed chickens, all kinds of stuff.
Humor is good, and I'm sure
it was cute.
The artwork was delightful.
Cute. And my mom went, which was a lot of fun.
Wonderful.
Luke, how about your A?
My A goes to the Negro League statistics now being incorporated into Major League Baseball. Phenom catcher Josh Gibson is now the all-time leading hitter.
I thought that was really interesting. That what took so long for those things, they have the same stadiums, the same rules, the same equipment and all?
I think it touches on the racial justice issues that we were talking about earlier. It was long overdue, and I think now these people who played in the Negro Leagues are going to be rightfully remembered as the great athletes that they were.
Great book about that called Race Ball, written by a guy at the University of Pittsburgh, by the way.
Race Ball,
Right.
B-A-L-L. Okay, very good. Well, thank you for watching tonight. Write us and tell us what you think. The addresses are on the screen. And something new. We're on YouTube. There's a playlist for Ivory Tower, each show segment, the A's and F's of course, as well as the full show. So look on WCNY's YouTube page. And of course, you can see us on TV Friday nights at 8, Saturday afternoons at 5:30, or stream us anytime at WCNY.org. Thanks for watching and good night.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Geddes Federal Savings and Loan offers home loans, IRAs, money market, checking, and savings accounts.
Geddes Federal, how can I help you this morning?
Personal service. Get it at Geddes. Offices in Westvale Plaza and in Manlius.
Bond, serving public and private companies, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs. Providing a crucial link with guidance on business matters, regulatory compliance, intellectual property, and employment law. Bond, essential to your business.
Ivory Tower is sponsored by James Jordan Associates Architects, providing professional architectural services to educational, commercial, and institutional clients throughout New York State. James Jordan Associates Architects, with offices in Richfield Springs, New York.